I was standing at my cousin's wedding, watching her dance with her father, when a stranger walked up to me and said, "You have my eyes." Little did I know that one DNA test would not only reveal the biggest lie of my life, but lead me to the man who had been searching for me for 25 years. My name is Sarah, and for 25 years, I believed I knew exactly who I was. I grew up in a small town in Ohio with my mom, Linda, and my stepdad, Frank, who married her when I was 3. Frank was the only father I'd ever known. He taught me to ride a bike, walked me to school, and never once made me feel like I wasn't his biological daughter. My mom always told me the same story about my biological father. He was just a guy I dated briefly before Frank. He didn't want to be involved, honey. But look how perfectly everything worked out. You got Frank instead. She'd ruffle my hair and change the subject. And for years, that was enough for me. Frank was incredible. He coached my Little League team, helped with homework every night. And when I got accepted to college, he cried harder than my mom did. "That's my girl," he'd say, beaming with pride. I never questioned it. Why would I? He was my dad in every way that mattered. But there were always these little moments that nagged at me, like when relatives would comment on how I looked nothing like either of my parents. Mom had blonde hair and blue eyes, Frank had dark hair and brown eyes, and there I was with these unusual green eyes and auburn hair that seemed to come from nowhere. "You're just unique, sweetheart," Mom would say whenever I brought it up. Then there were the family stories that never quite added up. Mom would mention things about her pregnancy with me that seemed ... off. She'd say she craved Italian food constantly, but she'd always hated Italian food. She'd talk about how I kicked so much during pregnancy, but then she'd accidentally mention feeling me kick when she supposedly wasn't pregnant yet. Little inconsistencies that I filed away but never really confronted. The weirdest thing was how Mom reacted. Whenever I expressed interest in genealogy or family history, in high school, we had to do a family tree project, and she got genuinely upset when I asked for details about my biological father's side. "Why do you need to know about him?" "Frank's family is your family," she'd snap, which was so unlike her usual gentle demeanor. Frank, bless his heart, was more open about it. "If you ever want to know about your biological father, that's okay with me," he'd tell me privately. "I'm secure in being your dad, but that's your mom's story to tell." I respected that, but it always made me wonder what exactly Mom was hiding. College came and went, and I threw myself into my career in marketing. I moved to Chicago, got engaged to my college boyfriend Marcus, and life was good. But as I got older, especially as Marcus and I started talking about having kids of our own, those old questions started surfacing again. What medical history was I missing? What traits might I pass down that I didn't even know about? I remember the exact moment I decided to look into it seriously. Marcus and I were at his family reunion, surrounded by 3 generations of people who all shared the same dimpled chin and infectious laugh. His nephew looked exactly like Marcus had as a kid, and his grandmother kept pointing out family resemblances going back generations. "Oh, you have great Uncle Tony's hands," she'd exclaim, "or that's definitely the Rossi nose." Watching all of this, I felt this profound sense of emptiness. Not because I didn't love my family, but because I realized I had no idea where half of my genetic story came from. I knew Frank's family history, his Italian roots, his grandfather's stories from Sicily, his family's tendency toward diabetes. But the other half, complete mystery. That night I called Mom. "I want to know about my biological father," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle but firm. "Not because I don't love Frank, but because I need to know my medical history." "If Marcus and I have kids, there's nothing to know," she cut me off. "He was nobody important. It's just some guy who didn't stick around." "But Mom, what was his name? What did he look like? Did he have any health issues I should know about?" Long pause. "Then Sarah, some stones are better left unturned. Trust me on this." That response bothered me for weeks. Some stones are better left unturned. What did that even mean? Is my biological father dangerous? Was there some family scandal? Or was Mom just being overprotective? Marcus, practical as always, suggested I just do one of those ancestry DNA tests. "You don't need to contact anyone," he reasoned. "Just get the health information you want, and maybe you'll get some clues about your heritage. Your mom doesn't even need to know." I ordered the kit that night, telling myself it was purely for medical reasons. Just spit in a tube, send it off, and get some answers about genetic health risks. Simple, private, no drama. But as I sealed that package and dropped it in the mailbox, I had this gut feeling that I was opening a door I could never close again. Standing there on that Chicago street corner, watching the mail truck drive away with my DNA sample, I whispered to myself, "Here goes nothing." I had no idea that nothing was actually everything I'd never known about my life. The DNA results took about 6 weeks to come back, and during that time I tried to convince myself this was no big deal, just some health information, maybe confirmation that I had Irish ancestry to explain my coloring, simple stuff. But the more I thought about it, the more questions bubbled up. It's like why Mom had been so adamant about not discussing my biological father. Why she'd gotten almost angry when I pushed the subject. Why now that I really thought about it? There weren't any photos of her pregnant with me, which was weird for someone who documented everything else with pictures. The results came back on a Tuesday. Remember, because I was having lunch at my desk, scrolling through emails when I got the notification. "Your ancestry results are ready." My heart started pounding as I logged in. The health information was there. Low risk for most genetic conditions. Likely lactose intolerant, which explained a lot. Higher risk for certain cancers to watch out for. Useful stuff. Then I clicked on the family matches, and that's when my world tilted sideways. The first match showed his close family. Estimated to be an aunt or uncle. The name was Robert Chen. I stared at that screen for a full minute, trying to process what I was seeing. Chen, as in ... Asian. I was supposedly the daughter of some random white guy Mom had dated briefly. But my closest genetic match was someone named Robert Chen. I clicked on his profile with shaking hands. The photo showed a man in his 60s with kind eyes and graying hair. Definitely Asian. And definitely sharing significant DNA with me according to this test. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the lab mixed up samples. But then I saw the second close match. Linda Chen, listed as a potential aunt or first cousin. Then David Chen, then Susan Wong Chen. I was staring at a whole family tree of people I'd never heard of, all showing up as close genetic relatives. With trembling fingers, I messaged Robert Chen. "Hi. This is going to sound strange, but Ancestredna is showing us as close family matches. I'm trying to understand my family history. Do you know anyone named Linda who might have had a daughter in 1998? I sent it before I could chicken out, then spent the rest of the day obsessively checking my phone. The response came that evening. "Hi Sarah, this is very interesting. I don't know a Linda personally, but my brother Michael has been looking for a daughter he had to give up contact with around that time. He's been searching for 25 years. Could we possibly talk on the phone?" I literally dropped my phone. Michael, my biological father, had a name, and he'd been looking for me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept rereading Robert's message and staring at the DNA matches. According to the science, these people were definitely my family, which meant everything Mom had told me about my biological father was, what exactly? A lie? A misunderstanding? The next day, Robert called during my lunch break. His voice was warm and gentle, with just a hint of an accent. "Sarah, I hope this isn't too overwhelming, but I think you might be my niece. My brother Michael. He's your biological father, I believe. He's told us about you for years. He's told you about me. Oh, yes. He's never stopped looking. He has your baby picture that your mother gave him, and he's kept it on his desk for 25 years. He talks about you all the time. Wonders what you're like, if you're healthy, if you're happy. Sarah, he didn't abandon you. He's been trying to find you. I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. That's impossible. My mom said he didn't want to be involved." Robert's voice got very quiet. "Sarah, I think there's some things you don't know about that situation. Would you be willing to talk to Michael directly? He can explain what really happened back then." I said yes before I fully processed what I was agreeing to. An hour later, my phone rang with a number from California. "Sarah," the voice was thick with emotion. "Is this really you?" I think so. Are you Michael?" He started crying. Actually crying on the phone with a stranger. Except I wasn't a stranger to him, apparently. "Can't believe I'm finally talking to you. I've imagined this moment so many times." For the next 2 hours, Michael told me a story that shattered everything I thought I knew about my origins. He and my mom had been together for over a year, not just some brief fling. They'd been engaged. He'd been there for every doctor's appointment during her pregnancy. It helped pick out baby names, had set up a nursery in their apartment. Then one day, when you were about 6 months old, I came home from work and you were both just gone, he said, his voice breaking. The apartment was empty except for a note saying she needed to start over somewhere new and that it was better if I didn't try to find you. But why would she do that? I think she was scared, honestly. I was 22, working 2 jobs to support us, and I know she felt overwhelmed. Her parents had disowned her for dating outside her race. Yes, Sarah, I'm half Chinese, which makes you a quarter Asian, and I think she panicked about raising a biracial child without family support. I looked at myself in my phone's camera, suddenly seeing my features differently. Those unusual green eyes, a combination of his Chinese heritage and her European genes, the auburn hair that had never made sense in my family tree. I hired private investigators, Michael continued. I spent thousands of dollars I didn't have trying to find you both. But Linda had changed her name, moved states. It was like you'd vanished. By the time I hung up that phone, I was shaking with rage, grief, and confusion. Everything. Literally everything. I'd been told about my origin story was a lie. My biological father hadn't abandoned me. My mother had kidnapped me from him. And tomorrow, I had to figure out how to confront the woman who'd stolen 25 years of a relationship from both of us. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Kept staring at the ceiling, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. My entire identity, who I was, where I came from, why I looked the way I did, had been built on lies. And not small lies, not white lies told to protect me, but massive, life-altering deceptions that had affected 3 people's lives for 25 years. I called in sick to work the next day. Couldn't imagine sitting in meetings and pretending to care about marketing campaigns when my world had just imploded. Instead, I spent hours on the phone with Michael, learning about the father I'd never known. He was a software engineer living in San Diego. He'd never married, though he'd had a few long-term relationships. I always told them up front that I had a daughter out there somewhere that I was still looking for, he explained. Some women understood, others didn't. But I couldn't give up searching for you. He told me about the baby book he'd kept, photos from my mom's pregnancy, ultrasound pictures, even a hospital bracelet from when I was born. I was there when you were born, Sarah. I held you for 3 hours straight. It's just staring at your face, memorizing every detail. You had this tiny birthmark on your left shoulder. Do you still have it? I touched the small, star-shaped mark I'd always wondered about. Yeah, I do. I used to call it your lucky star, he said, and I could hear him smiling through the phone. But the more I learned about Michael, the angrier I became at my mom. This wasn't some deadbeat father who'd walked away from responsibility. This was a man who'd been ready to be a full-time dad, who'd been devastated by our disappearance, who'd spent decades wondering if his daughter was alive and well. After 3 days of phone calls, Michael asked the question I'd been dreading. Would you like to meet in person? I know this is a lot to process, and I don't want to pressure you. But I've been waiting 25 years to hug my daughter. I started, then stopped. Did I want to meet him? Absolutely. Was I terrified? Also absolutely. Can I think about it? So just ... It's a lot. Of course, sweetheart. Take all the time you need. I've waited this long. I can wait longer. That weekend, I drove home to Ohio to confront my mom. I needed answers before I could decide what to do next. The 3-hour drive gave me plenty of time to rehearse what I was going to say. But when I walked into my childhood home and saw Mom's face light up with surprise and joy, all my prepared speeches died in my throat. Sarah, what a wonderful surprise. I was just thinking about calling you. Frank, come see who's here. Frank emerged from his study beaming and gave me one of his trademark bear hugs. There's my favorite daughter. What brings you home, kiddo? Looking at them, these people who'd raised me, loved me, been my family for 22 years, I felt my resolve wavering. How do you destroy someone's life with a single conversation? We sat down for dinner, chatting about work and Marcus and wedding plans, and I kept waiting for the right moment to bring up what I'd discovered. But every time I opened my mouth, I'd see Frank's proud smile or Mom's loving expression, and I'd chicken out. Finally, after Frank went to bed, Mom and I were cleaning dishes when I found my courage. Mom, I did one of those DNA tests. her hand stilled on the plate she was washing. "Oh, that's nice, honey. Learn anything interesting about your heritage?" "Yeah, actually, I learned that I'm a quarter Chinese." The plate slipped from her hands and shattered in the sink. We both stared at the broken pieces for a moment before she turned to face me, her face completely white. "Sarah, I can explain. Can you?" I interrupted, surprised by the anger in my own voice. "Can you explain why you told me my biological father didn't want me when he has actually been searching for me for 25 years? Can you explain why you lied about everything?" She sank into a kitchen chair like her legs had given out. For a long moment, she didn't speak, just sat there with tears streaming down her face. "I was 20 years old," she finally whispered. 20 years old with a baby, and I was terrified. My parents had cut me off completely when they found out I was pregnant by someone who was untwite. I had no money, no support system, and Michael was working constantly just to keep us afloat. "So you ran away?" I panicked. "One day I looked at you in your crib and I realized I had no idea how to raise a biracial child in a world that might not accept you. I didn't know how to explain to you why your grandparents wouldn't meet you, why some people might treat you differently, and Michael ... He was a good man, but he was so young, and we were both drowning. So you made that decision for everyone? For him? For me? For yourself?" She nodded, crying harder now. "I thought if I could just start over somewhere new, find someone stable to help me raise you. I thought I was protecting everyone. I thought you'd be better off not knowing about a father who might not be able to provide for you properly. Mom, he's a software engineer. He's been financially stable for decades, and more importantly, he loved me. He wanted me. I know that now," she sobbed. "But I was 20 and scared, and I made the worst decision of my life. I've regretted it every day since, but it felt like it was too late to go back." Looking at my mom, really looking at her, I realized she'd been carrying this secret for 25 years. The woman who de-raised me with such love and care had been living with the knowledge that she deprived me of my biological father and him of his daughter. "Mom," I said quietly, "I'm going to meet him." She nodded through her tears. "I know, and ... Sarah, tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I know sorry isn't enough, but tell him anyway." 2 weeks later, I was standing in the San Diego airport, scanning the crowd for a man I'd only seen in photos. Michael had offered to fly to Chicago to meet me, but something about the idea of meeting my biological father in his home territory felt right. Like I needed to see the life he'd built, the world he'd inhabited while searching for me, Sarah. I turned toward the voice and saw him immediately. The photos hadn't captured how tall he was, or the way my eyes seemed to light up when he smiled. He was standing about 10 feet away, holding a small bouquet of flowers, looking as nervous as I felt. "Hi," I managed, my voice catching in my throat. We stood there for a moment, just staring at each other, and I could see him taking in every detail of my face, the same way I was studying his. Then he stepped forward tentatively. Would it be okay if I hugged you?" I nodded, and the next thing I knew, I was in my father's arms for the first time since I was 6 months old. He held me like he was afraid I might disappear again, and I could feel him shaking slightly. "You're so beautiful," he whispered. "You look just like your mother did at your age, but you have my grandmother's eyes." The drive to his house was filled with nervous chatter. He pointed out landmarks, asked about my flight, told me about the restaurant he'd picked for dinner. Normal father-daughter conversation that felt simultaneously natural and surreal. His house was a modest 3-bedroom place with a beautiful garden in front. I bought the extra bedrooms hoping that someday, ... double quotes, he trailed off, then cleared his throat, while hoping for exactly this, actually. Inside, he showed me around like a proud homeowner, but I could tell he was really showing me the life I could have been part of. The home office where he worked, filled with photos of extended family. The kitchen where he'd learned to cook Chinese dishes from his mother. And then, on his desk in the living room, exactly where Robert had said it would be, was a small framed photo of a baby. That's you at 3 months old?" he said softly. "It's the only picture I had until yesterday when I spent 4 hours going through your Facebook photos." He laughed, but his eyes were wet. "I know that sounds creepy, but Sarah, I missed 25 years. I wanted to see every birthday, every graduation, every moment I could find." I picked up the baby photo, studying the tiny face that was supposedly mine. I looked different than I expected. You were the most beautiful baby I'd ever seen. Still are the most beautiful person I've ever seen." That evening, over dinner at a small Chinese restaurant that he said served his grandmother's favorite dishes, Michael told me more stories about those early months of my life, how I'd only fall asleep to his off-key singing, how I'd grab his finger and hold on tight whenever he tried to put me down, how he'd sometimes just sit and watch me sleep, amazed that he'd helped create something so perfect. "The hardest part wasn't just losing you," he admitted over tea. "It was not knowing. Were you happy? Were you healthy? Did you know that somewhere out there someone loved you desperately and was looking for you?" "I was happy," I told him honestly. "Mom and Frank, my stepdad, they gave me a really good life. I never doubted that I was loved." I saw relief wash over his face. "Good, that's all I ever wanted to know." But then he got quiet, turning his teacup around and around in his hands. "Sarah, I need to tell you something, and it might be hard to hear." My stomach dropped. After all the revelations of the past few weeks, what could possibly be left? "I hired investigators to look for you both, on and off for years. About 10 years ago, one of them found you." I stared at him. "Found me? Found your mom, actually?" "She was living in Ohio, married to Frank, and you were in high school. The investigators sent me photos. You at your graduation, you playing softball, you and some friends at what looked like a school dance. You knew where I was for 10 years and didn't contact me?" Michael's hands were shaking now. "I wanted to. God, Sarah, I wanted to so badly. But you looked so happy. You had this full life, this family that clearly adored you. I realized that if I showed up and disrupted all of that, if I forced you to deal with the truth about your mother's choices, I might be taking away your happiness." I felt tears starting to fall. "Hey, so you chose not to?" "I chose to wait until you were an adult and could make your own decisions about whether you wanted me in your life. I figured if I waited until after college, till you were settled and mature enough to handle the complexity of the situation, ... He looked up at me with those familiar green eyes. "I never stopped hoping you'd find me somehow, and you did." We sat in silence for a moment, processing the weight of all the choices that had led us to this moment. My mother's choice to run, Michael's choice to let me go. My choice to take a DNA test out of simple curiosity. "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Waiting, I mean." He considered this carefully. "I regret every day I missed with you, but I don't regret trying to protect your happiness. That's what parents do, right? Put their children's well-being ahead of their own desires." Looking across the table at this man who'd sacrificed his own longing to protect a happiness he'd only seen in stolen photographs, I realized I was looking at the kind of father most people only dream of having. Someone who'd loved me enough to let me go and patient enough to wait for me to come back. "I want you in my life," I said suddenly. "I don't know what that looks like yet, or how we figure out 25 years of missed time, but I want to try." His smile could have powered the entire restaurant. "I'd like that very much." Flying back to Chicago after meeting Michael felt like returning from an alternate universe. I had a father now, not just the idea of one, but an actual person with stories and quirks and a lifetime of love he'd been saving up for me. I also had to figure out how to integrate this earth-shattering knowledge into my existing life. Marcus picked me up from the airport, and I could tell he was nervous about what I'd discovered. We'd talked briefly while I was in San Diego, but I'd been too overwhelmed to give him details. So he asked as we drove home, "How did it go?" He's wonderful," I said, and started crying again. "Marcus, my entire life story is a lie. Everything I thought I knew about where I came from, who I am, none of it was true." I told him everything during that car ride. About Michael's love story with my mom, about his desperate search for me, about the decade he'd known where I was but chose not to disrupt my happiness. By the time we reached our apartment, Marcus was quiet and thoughtful. "What are you thinking?" I asked as we sat on our couch. "Honestly, I'm thinking about what this means for us. For our future kids. Sarah, you just discovered you have an entirely different ethnic background than you thought. You have a whole extended family you've never met. Your medical history is completely different. This changes everything about how you see yourself." He was right, and I hadn't even begun to process those implications. "Are you having second thoughts about marrying me?" I asked, half joking but also genuinely worried. "The opposite, actually. I'm thinking about how brave you are, how you handled all of this with such grace. But I'm also thinking we need to postpone the wedding." My heart sank. Why? Because you need time to figure out who you are now. You need to build a relationship with Michael, meet his family, understand this part of yourself you never knew existed. You can't do that while planning a wedding and starting a marriage. I wanted to argue, but deep down I knew he was right. Everything felt unstable, like I was standing on shifting ground. The hardest part was calling my mom. We'd barely spoken since our confrontation in her kitchen, and I knew she was terrified that meeting Michael meant I was going to cut her out of my life entirely. "Hi, Mom. Sarah, sweetheart, how are you?" "How was ... double quotes. She couldn't finish the sentence. "How was meeting my father?" I supplied. "It was good, Mom. Really good." I heard her sharp intake of breath. "I'm glad. Is he well?" "He's great. He's kind and funny and incredibly patient. He's also hurt and confused about why you made the choices you did, but he's not angry. He asked me to tell you he forgives you." You started crying immediately. "He forgives me." "After what I put him through, Mom, I need you to understand something. I'm not calling to punish you or to make you feel worse than you already do. But I am going to build a relationship with Michael, and that means our family dynamic is going to change. Are you? Are you going to tell Frank?" This was the question I'd been dreading. Frank had been my father in every way that mattered for 22 years. He'd walked me down the aisle at my college graduation, been there for every milestone, supported every dream. How do you tell someone like that he's been living a lie too? Have to, Mom. He deserves to know the truth. But what if this changes how he feels about you? And that's a risk I have to take. But Mom, Frank loves me. Real love doesn't disappear because of biological technicalities. That weekend, I drove back to Ohio again, this time with Marcus for moral support. I'd asked Mom to make sure Frank was there because I wanted to tell them both together. We gathered in the living room where I'd grown up, where Frank had helped me with countless homework assignments, and where we watched movies every Friday night for years. Looking around at the family photos covering every surface, pictures of me at various ages with Frank and Mom. All of us looking genuinely happy. I almost lost my nerve. "Frank," I started, my voice shaking. "I have something I need to tell you, and it's going to be shocking." He leaned forward, immediately concerned. "Are you okay? Is Marcus okay?" "We're fine. But I recently discovered that... Well, my biological father isn't who we thought he was." I told him everything, the same story I'd told Marcus. Watching Frank's face go through a series of expressions: confusion, shock, hurt, and finally, something that looked like relief. "So your real father has been looking for you all this time?" he asked quietly. "Frank, you are my real father. Biology doesn't change 22 years of love and commitment. Michael may be my biological father, but you're my dad." His eyes filled with tears. "Bear, I've always worried that someday you'd want to find your biological father, and that you'd realize I was just... a substitute." "A substitute?" I was incredulous. "Frank, you chose to love me every single day. You chose to be my father when you didn't have to. It's not being a substitute. That's being the real thing." Mom was crying quietly on the couch, watching this exchange between the two people she loved most. "I want to meet him," Frank said suddenly. "This Michael. If he's going to be part of your life, I'd like to meet the man who helped create my daughter." And that's when I realized that love really is bigger than biology. That families can expand and change and accommodate new truths without losing what made them strong in the first place. But I also knew that the hardest conversations were still ahead of me. 6 months later, I was standing in another airport, but this time I wasn't alone. Marcus was beside me, holding my hand, and Frank was nervously adjusting his tie for the third time in 10 minutes. We were flying to San Diego for what Michael had jokingly called the most important meeting of his life, dinner with the man who'd raised his daughter. What if he doesn't like me? Frank had asked during the flight, and I'd realized that both of my fathers were equally nervous about this meeting. "Frank, you raised me to be a kind, confident, successful woman. What's not to like?" Michael met us at the airport with his girlfriend, Janet, whom he'd been dating for 2 years. She was a kindergarten teacher with kind eyes and an easy laugh. And within minutes of meeting her, I could see why Michael had finally felt ready to let someone new into his carefully guarded heart. "He talks about you constantly," she whispered to me while the men exchanged awkward handshakes. "Sarah this, Sarah that." I was getting a little jealous until I realized he was talking about his daughter, not an ex-girlfriend. That first dinner was stilted. with both Frank and Michael being overly polite and formal. But something shifted when Frank started telling stories about my childhood. The time I got stuck in our neighbor's tree, and Frank had to borrow a ladder to get me down. Or how I'd insisted on wearing my Halloween costume to school every day in November when I was 7. She was always fearless, Frank said, smiling at the memories. Maybe too fearless. I spent her entire childhood convinced she was going to give me a heart attack. She gets that from me, Michael replied. I was the kid who climbed water towers and jumped off bridges into rivers. God, Frank groaned. That explains so much. Just like that, they weren't two men competing for my affection anymore. They were two fathers comparing notes about the daughter they both loved. Over the next few days, something beautiful happened. Frank and Michael discovered they had more in common than either expected. Both were passionate about baseball. Both loved cooking. Both had strong opinions about the proper way to change oil in a car. And more importantly, they both understood that loving me wasn't a zero-sum game. You know, Michael told Frank one evening while they were cleaning dishes after dinner, I spent 25 years wondering what kind of man was raising my daughter. I used to lie awake at night hoping he was good to her, hoping he loved her like she deserved to be loved. Thank you for being that man. Frank's response made me cry. Thank you for giving me the chance to be her father. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. But the real breakthrough came when we visited Michael's mother, my newly discovered grandmother. At 82, Grandma Chen was sharp, funny, and completely unfazed by the dramatic family reunion happening in her living room. So you're the granddaughter I've been hearing about for 25 years, she said, looking me up and down appraisingly. Michael always said you'd be beautiful. He was right. She'd prepared a feast of traditional Chinese dishes and spent the afternoon teaching me family recipes that had been passed down for generations. Your great-grandmother's dumplings, she explained, guiding my clumsy hands through the folding technique. She taught me when I was your age, and now I teach you. Frank watched this with genuine joy, not jealousy. Look at that, he whispered to Marcus. She's learning about her heritage. Later that evening, Grandma Chen pulled me aside. I want to show you something, she said, leading me to a small bedroom that had clearly been decorated as a shrine to hope. The walls were covered with photos Michael had collected over the years. Pictures from my Facebook page, copies of school photos Mom had somehow let slip into public view, even a graduation photo someone had posted online. 25 years, she said simply. Every birthday, every Christmas, every holiday, he'd come here and tell me stories about what he imagined you were doing that day. He'd buy you presents and put them in that closet, thinking maybe someday. I opened the closet door and gasped. It was filled with gifts, dolls and books for a little girl, art supplies and jewelry for a teenager, professional clothes and kitchen appliances for a young woman. 25 years of birthdays and Christmases, and just because gifts from a father who'd never stopped hoping. He never gave up on you, Grandma Chen said. Even when everyone told him to move on, to start his own family, he said his family wasn't complete without his daughter. Standing there in that room full of love and hope and decades of unwavering faith, I finally understood the true magnitude of what had been lost and found. This wasn't just about me discovering my biological father. It was about a man who'd never stopped being a father, even when he had no child to father. The trip ended with a promise. Michael and Janet would come to Chicago for Thanksgiving, and Frank had already started planning the menu, excited to cook his famous stuffing for his new extended family, as he'd started calling them. We were going to figure out how to blend our lives, how to make space for all this love that had been waiting 25 years to find its proper place. But the real resolution came 3 months later, at my cousin Emma's wedding in Cleveland. I'd driven down from Chicago with Marcus, and we were staying with my parents for the weekend. It felt good to call Frank and Mom my parents without any qualifiers now, because that's what they were and always had been. The wedding was beautiful. Emma looked radiant, the venue was gorgeous, and I was genuinely happy for her. But weddings always made me a little melancholy now, thinking about my own postponed plans and how much my life had changed. I was standing by the dessert table, watching Emma dance with her father, when I felt someone tap my shoulder. Excuse me, but you have my eyes. I turned around to see a man about my age with familiar green eyes and a nervous smile. I'm sorry? I said, confused. I'm David Chen, he said, extending his hand. Your cousin. Uncle Michael told me you might be here, and when I saw you from across the room, ... He gestured at his own eyes. It's a family trait, apparently. I stared at him for a moment, processing. You're Michael's nephew. Guilty as charged. You're the famous Sarah we've all been hearing about for literally our entire lives. His smile widened. I have to say, it's surreal to finally meet the mythical cousin. Mythical? Oh yeah, Uncle Michael has been talking about his lost daughter at every family gathering since before I was born. We all knew about you, we all hoped you'd come back someday. You're basically family legend at this point. As we talked, more relatives appeared. Michael's brother Robert, whom I'd first messaged through Ancestry.na, his sister Susan, cousins and second cousins, and family friends who'd all been hoping for this reunion for decades. This is incredible, I told David as we watched our relatives interrogate Marcus about his intentions toward me. I've never been part of a big family before. We'll get used to it, he laughed. We're loud, we're nosy, and we're going to be calling you constantly now that we know where you are. Later that evening, back at my parents' house, I called Michael to tell him about the unexpected family reunion. David's there? He asked, delighted. I told him you might be at that wedding, but I didn't want to pressure you into meeting more family before you were ready. I'm ready, I realized as I said it. I'm ready for all of it. It's a big family, the traditions I don't know yet, the complicated logistics of having relatives spread across the country. I'm ready to be your daughter. You've always been my daughter, he said softly. Now you just know it too. 6 months after that, Marcus and I finally had our wedding. Frank walked me down the aisle, just as we'd always planned. But Michael was there too, sitting in the front row next to Grandma Chen, both of them crying openly as I said my vows. At the reception, I gave to father-daughter dances, one with Frank, To the Way You Look Tonight, which had been our song since I was little, and one with Michael To At Last by Etta James, because as he said, at last I get to dance with my daughter at her wedding. But the moment that will stay with me forever happened during the cake cutting, when someone asked me to make a speech. A year ago, I said, looking out at this room full of people I loved. I thought I knew exactly who I was and where I came from. Then I took a DNA test out of curiosity, and my entire world changed. I discovered I had a father who'd been searching for me for 25 years, a grandmother who'd been keeping vigil, cousins who'd been waiting to meet me. I found Michael in the crowd, saw him wiping his eyes. But here's what I've learned. Love isn't diminished by being shared. Having two fathers doesn't make either of them less important. Having two families doesn't make either of them less real. If anything, discovering Michael made me love Frank more because I realized he chose to be my father every day. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. I raised my champagne glass. Oh, here's to the families we're born into, the families we choose, and the families that choose us. Here's to DNA tests that reveal not just our genetics, but the incredible capacity of the human heart to make room for more love than we ever thought possible. As everyone toasted and applauded, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror behind the head table. Same green eyes, same auburn hair, same face I'd seen in the mirror my whole life. But now, when I looked at myself, I didn't see a mystery. I saw the perfect combination of my mother's courage, Frank's steadiness, and Michael's patience. I saw 25 years of being loved by people who never stopped believing I'd find my way home. That DNA test didn't just tell me about my genetic heritage. It revealed that sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that take decades to unfold. And that the greatest gift you can give someone is the space to love you, even when you don't know they exist. Now, when people ask me about my family, I smile and say, it's complicated, but in the best possible way. 'Cause the truth is, I didn't just gain a father that day, I got my DNA results. I discovered that I'd never lost him in the first place.